So far, we have gone through how to shade the eyes and then how to shade the nose. And then the last part of the face that we're going to concentrate on is how to shade the mouth. And then next week, our last special tutorial will be how to shade the hair. So after today, you should be able to shade any other area of skin. So anything between the cheeks, the forehead, the chin, any of the neck that shows, all of that is fair game using the same gradual building up value techniques where you start with a very light value and then you layer light value on light value on light value until it becomes not so light anymore. And then, of course, by doing that gradual layering, you are also then smoothing out your stroke marks without actually smudging or blending them. You're just kind of layering on top of them, and that's what makes your strokes look so smooth. So we talked about for the eyeball to think of the roundness of the shape. We talked about thinking of it like a sphere. So you're shading it as a physical, round, three-dimensional object instead of, for example, a football shape, right? And then for the nose, our technique was to think of it as three spheres or three round shapes, right? So kind of the same technique as the eyeball, except that you're, breaking it into three different parts. And just like the eyelid blankets over the round shape for the eyeball, so too does the nose skin that kind of blankets over those round shapes for the nose. For the mouth, our round shapes are not technically spherical, but they do still have dimension, and they are still round. They're just not like a ball shape. So for the mouth, what we want to think about is kind of three distinct parts, okay? For the shape of the mouth, and this is going to obviously differ depending on what shape is actually present in your photo, okay? The mouth that I have here in my example photo has a little bit of separation between the upper and lower lip. Yours may or may not have a gap, but even if it doesn't have a gap, or if it's not open, it will have a lip line, like a solid line, and that, typically speaking, is the darkest part of the mouth, is that lip line right in between the two lips. Does that make sense? Okay, so in my case, I have some semblance of teeth here. They certainly are not very, very clear or very, very obvious, but there are at least a hint of some teeth, and then the rest of that is pretty dark. So this is probably one of the only times where we are actually going to kind of make it dark right away. Normally we would say, okay, let's make light layers of value, right? And then we would kind of blend them and layer them up lightly so that it would build up gradually into those values. In this case, for your lip line, it's one of those rare instances where you can kind of go dark right away, because in many cases, it is often one of the darkest areas of your whole drawing. Okay, so here is the idea of that lip line, and then you guys will have your proportions drawn in already, so I'm not going to take a ton of time being very precise about proportions, because the emphasis for our demo today is value. But the idea is that you have a upper lip and a lower lip. Very often they will not be the same height, so you probably will have one or the other that is a little thinner or a little thicker. In my case, I drew my upper lip way too thick. The upper lip in this photo that I'm using is quite a bit thinner than the lower lip. And then the idea here is that between those two lips, okay, which one is lighter in value? The upper lip or the lower lip? Which one is lighter?
Bottom.
The bottom, the lower lip. Why is that? Does anybody know? In a typical lighting situation that we would normally see in an average human existence, why would the lower lip appear lighter? It sticks out. So remember, we have to think of these as three-dimensional objects. So instead of like the ball shape that we've been using on the features so far, now this is more of like a tube shape. Okay? Where is our light source often coming from? The top. Yeah. Usually in like a ceiling, or if we're outside, it's coming from the sky. So because the lower lip sticks out the way it does, right, it's going to catch more light on that surface. So that's what makes the lower lip often appear much lighter in value than the upper lip. Okay, and vice versa. That's why the upper lip appears so dark, because most of it is in shadow, because the light can't get to it because of the way it kind of curves under. Does that make sense? Okay. So when you are shading, we need to think of both the upper and the lower lip as kind of, like I said, tube shapes. So that means that we're not just filling them in with flat values, but instead we need to think about which part of that tube collects more light and which part of that tube falls more into shadow. So again, you're going to go based on what your photo shows, but in most cases, the bottom is going to be darker because of how it kind of curves under and it falls more into shadow underneath. Okay, we're going to keep that dark edge down there for that lip line. And then the lower lip is lighter in value. Now, if I compare the white of this page to the highlight of that lip, the lip is still quite a bit darker than the white of the page, right? And you can make the same comparison to, let's say, the highlight of the nose, which you should already have. So which is lighter, the highlight of the nose or the highlight of the lip? They're kind of similar, right? And you might think that, oh, the nose is a lighter skin tone than the lip. Typically, our lips are a little bit darker in skin tone than the rest of our skin. But actually, when we compare it in black and white, the highlight of our lip might be lighter than you think. Okay? So the tricky part with the lower lip now is that not only is the curve happening this way, like a caterpillar, but it's also happening this way. Okay? So we have kind of two dimensions of curve happening here. So in that way, it's still kind of like those round sphere shapes that you are using on the nose and in the eyeball. We just kind of have to be a little bit more careful about which way those curves are happening. So I've got darker towards the corner of the mouth on the left side. I've got darker values towards the corner of the mouth on the right side. Again, your photo might be slightly different. And then I've got my lighter area in the middle. Pay special attention to what shape that light value needs to take. Okay? And then under the lip, the part that really kind of solidifies this as a dimensional drawing and as that three-dimensional illusion is under that lip. Because the lip sticks out, we have a shadow under the lip, particularly in most cases right in the center. There's not that much of a shadow over here, but there is a significant shadow in the center. Are you guys watching? Okay. So underneath the bottom part, I need to fill in that shadow. And that's what's going to define that bottom edge. Okay? So you're also going to need to pay attention to how sharp does that shadow transition into the lip area, or how gradual does it transition to the skin underneath? And that might be different depending on what the circumstances are with the lighting in your actual photo. Okay? It's also, for my case, it's going to look really dark right now because I don't have the rest of the skin drawn in down here, whereas like once you have the rest of that skin drawn in, then that won't look as contrasty. It won't look as much of a change like it does right now. Does that make sense? Okay. Just like we talked about with the eyes, where we were looking at which areas were lighter, which areas were darker. And then, I don't know if you noticed this, if you picked up on this, but I didn't say really anything about eyelashes when I demoed the eyes, because that's one of the last things that you add in. And typically, you really don't even have to add that many. You're kind of just suggesting a few eyelashes, and then your brain kind of fills in the rest. So with the lips, the equivalent of that eyelash detail is going to be these kind of creases, okay? So you need to pay special attention to not just where you see the creases, but more particularly, what direction they go in, okay? So in this case, and I would say this is typical of most cases, they're going to curve as they get farther and farther to the side of the lips. So kind of like parentheses, okay? And then the other side is going to go the other way. And I'm only putting in just a few, just to suggest kind of that they're there, but I don't want to like overly detail it. And then the ones in the center are a little straighter up and down. They don't curve nearly as much, and they kind of appear a little closer together. So I'm not really making stripes, but I am just kind of suggesting a few little creases in there. Does that make sense? Okay? And like I said, the same is true of the eyelashes. So if we look at where we have the definition, most of that is just like a kind of a line of value. And there's a few eyelashes in my picture on the bottom. There's kind of a few on the top, but they don't go very far. So do not just let yourself get carried away with like drawing a ton of eyelashes. You might only need, right, just kind of like a couple. And pay attention to what direction they're going in. Okay, I literally added just like 6 eyelashes just now, and that's plenty. We can get the idea that it's, you know, a more feminine person because the eyelashes appear a little longer. Not that more masculine people can't have eyelashes, but that is one of the kind of suggestive traits about that. I paid attention to the direction that they went, okay? And that's it. You're kind of suggesting more than you are outlining. So the same is true then for the lips. And then for this particular lip example, the last thing I would probably do is reevaluate. I would say, okay, now that I have values in the top and the bottom, I don't have the same comparison in the photo as I do on my drawing. So like when I compare the upper lip to the lower lip, there's way more difference in my photo than there is in my drawing, which means that I need to go back and darken that upper lip so that I have the same comparison. It's very similar to when you were drawing your proportions, right? And you said this part is bigger than this part and by how much when you were getting your proportions outlined. Okay, now that looks a little bit more faithful to what is there. And now I'm noticing that the teeth are much brighter. They're more in line with what value the upper lip is in this photo. So I would darken that too. It's almost like they're not there. They're just so barely there. Again, we're kind of suggesting more than we are telling. Does that make sense? You guys have questions? If I was going to then shade more, okay, obviously the nose and the mouth on my drawings don't line up because I did them separately and I didn't plot out the proportions. But from a value perspective, I would then look at, okay, the upper lip line, right above that upper lip, there's a highlight there. For the same reason that there's a highlight in the lower lip, because it sticks out and it catches the light, like a shelf, okay? So I have a highlight up here, and then it very gradually fades back into kind of this medium gray value with a really subtle gradient. It's a subtle blend from that lighter value to that medium value. But to go from, let's say, our right side of the upper lip here to the left side of the upper lip, the left side for my photo is darker, okay? So what you're going to be asking yourself for all these, not only just the features, but for all of the rest of the skin now is, how do those value changes happen? So in other words, are they abrupt, like from this highlight here to the upper lip? Or are they very, very gradual, like from this area of value right here, kind of under the nostril, as it goes across to this kind of crease area? That's a very, very subtle shift in value, very, very gradual. Not a lot of contrast there, okay? And then here, under the lower corner of the lip, there's a little highlight here. But it's not, it doesn't have hard edges, right? It has very soft, blended edges. So all of those subtle differences, the more you see, the more you can explain and identify and describe them, like actually in words, the better you will be able to draw them. Because you can't draw what you don't recognize or acknowledge is there. And we don't want to just get into that stage where we just say, oh, I know what it looks like because I've been looking at this photo forever, and then you just start like making stuff up. That would be a very, very poor detour on your journey to a good quality drawing. Does that make sense? Do you guys have questions? As far as teeth go, if your drawing has like an open mouth where there are teeth very visible, you want to do what I call the white paper test, where you use a clean white piece of paper and you compare the value of your white paper to each tooth. And not just each tooth, but like each part of each tooth. So what usually happens is like the side of the tooth is a little darker, not a lot, but a little darker than say the middle of the tooth. Or maybe you have a top to bottom difference in value. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions? You guys feel good? All right, well, good.